'67, they said, well, we know there are two Americas, one black, one white, one separate and equal. But when it came to committing the money to ending those historical inequities, that money ended up going to Vietnam and to fight a war against brown people. But that's another story. You know, in this election, there's some lessons that, we need to learn. And as I said, one of the biggest ones is just ignoring the pundits and the polls. And in looking at what's happening since the election, and I mean, everything has not been decided. I think they're still tallying votes in Alaska, North Carolina, Georgia, and Nevada. So there's a possibility that Trump will pick up some additional electoral votes. Clearly not enough to reach the required 270 electoral votes. And at this point, the race is over. But Trump and his band of followers still believe that this election was stolen from him. As of yet, not a shred of evidence has been produced that would show any sort of malfeasance on the part of anybody, for that matter. And for people who are counting these ballots, that would mean people all across this country would have had to have been, bribed in order to, manipulate the ballots. Some of these people are probably Republicans. Some may be independent. Some may be members of the Libertarian or Green Party. So why would these people all of a sudden decide to manipulate the vote? It really doesn't make sense, but there are so many of Trump's followers who are parroting exactly what it is he's saying, that the election was stolen from him, that there were multiple ballots sent. I'm not sure how they arrived at this, but that is the story that the president...
And everybody should think about this. If there was such manipulation, why is Mitch McConnell still in office? Why didn't we take the Senate, or why wasn't the Senate manipulated, as well as the House? Why? It makes absolutely no sense. And what people need to look at, I don't know if anything was covered, is I guess I was in a lengthy debate with somebody on the Facebook, notorious Facebook, and their thing was nobody was allowed. They stole the election. They stole the election. You have every agency that said that there's nothing wrong with this election. This is a waste of time. Donald Trump is really trying to avoid prosecution from the District of New York. It's all over. It's game over. Money laundering, the whole 9 yards. That he said, where did they even start if this man is put out of office? Mueller did not say that they found nothing. It is they could not prosecute while this man sits in office, and that's all. I'm not gonna go long on this. I really do enjoy the show with you guys, but I just needed to point that out for the listeners. Come on, if you're gonna cheat, we're gonna do it big. If you're gonna play, you're gonna play to win.
Well,
Sorry, please go ahead.
You raise a valid point. If the Democrats were trying to steal the election, why not, manipulate the election down in Kentucky? Because Mitch McConnell is definitely someone that has been a thorn in the side of the Democrats, and that's putting it mildly. And, the races in Georgia, the one with Ossoff and Perdue, that would have shifted the balance of power in favor of the Democrats. Those races would have been manipulated as well. But I heard something just prior to coming on air, and that is that right now Trump is preparing for his next business venture, and that is basically something like a podcast or something like that where people would subscribe. So he's looking to earn somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 billion a year based off his experiences as the president. So I think that once that is established, he may then leave office. But again, it's one thing to go out with a fight or without a fight, and it's another to say, I'm not going out at all. And at this point, he's not going out at all.
I'll be very honest with you. The scarier prospect is that you're going to have to deal with this maniac in 4 years. This is a man that murdered over 200,000 people.
Well,
over 200,000 people.
Now,
when you tell people, don't worry, it's a hoax, the coronavirus is a hoax, this is definitely one of the most advanced countries in the world. Why are we leading the world in coronavirus? Because the leadership, because the man that everybody has been basically conditioned to listen to. You go lay down. Go lay down. That has been conditioned to listen to throughout the centuries. You listen to the president, and this man sits up and says, there's nothing to worry about. Don't wear a mask. If you wear it, he basically is responsible for the death of thousands, hundreds of thousands.
Now, you know what? I wouldn't go that far, right, to say he is responsible. Because something, people have to think on their own. If you are aware of the fact that people are dying, now, we call it the coronavirus, we call it COVID-19. I'm not exactly sure what it is. I think this is a man-made organism that has been put out there to reduce population. That's my belief, right? But people have to think for themselves, and you have to do what's necessary to protect yourself. If you are aware of people dying, if you're aware of cases spiking, and you still choose not to wear a mask, I can't say that we can blame Trump solely for that. People have to take responsibility for their own actions. And, I mean, they're foolish actions. If you know that there is high incidence of COVID in certain places, you probably shouldn't be at a super spreader event. You probably shouldn't be out there not wearing a mask. You probably shouldn't be out there without social distancing. But people took that risk on their own. So you can't really blame Trump for that, right? Because these are people that made the decision to go anyway, despite the warnings. And, they have to see what's going on in the media. They do show that their cases are spiking.
I do agree. And I agree, partially with that part, okay? Because, yes, we do have our own choices to make, okay? Personal choices. But when it is encouraged. Now, if you said COVID-19 is here, and, but I'm having this rally, it is up to the individual. But when you start telling people, look at that mask, it's the biggest mask I've ever seen. Why are they wearing a mask? When you see a whole administration, who, by the way, ended up getting infected, the whole doggone White House. That's his fault. That's leadership. Okay? And I have to really start speaking to these people that are saying they wouldn't allow us in to watch the count. First of all, that's proven that that's a lie. I've been around more than my share of elections.
Well, even the Republicans have said, the Republicans have admitted. Now, I was just watching Fox News, just out of curiosity, and even Fox News said that, listen.
I watch it because you gotta know how the other side thinks.
Right, and they said that it's not true. I think down in Philadelphia, they had 19 observers inside the facility watching the count. So the Trump administration went to court and said that, look, they have us 12 feet away and we cannot see what's going on. So the court ruled that they could be now 6 feet away from the ballot counters, and they could observe from 6 feet away. So I guess what they're trying to do is preserve social distancing and give these people at least personal space to conduct their business. So we know that's untrue. We know those are absolute lies that they were not allowed to observe.
There's two things that happened in Philadelphia. A couple of them were newsworthy. But the whole idea behind going behind a curtain to vote is so nobody knows you vote your conscience. You don't. Otherwise, everybody can just check their name on the chalkboard and walk out. You go behind that. What did the observers want? To be able to look at everybody's name, address, their personal information, to see who voted for him and who did not? That's ridiculous. On top of that, this is just a heated exchange on Facebook with somebody that I know. And as a matter of fact, he was invited to come to the show and voice his opinion, and we'll go back and forth with this, And basically, I asked him a simple question. I asked him, do you think that carrying an AR-15, a semi-automatic weapon, to a polling station could be construed just a little bit as voter intimidation or an attempt to suppress the vote? What I got was, is every American's Second Amendment right to get? That's not what I asked you. Because as being a Pennsylvania state constable, I was on election. And I'm just wearing a sidearm. I'm not wearing a shotgun, or I'm not carrying a shotgun or AR-15, AR-15, or any intimidating weapon. You're not allowed to be within 25 feet of the doors of that polling station or of those machines, within 25 feet by law. These people are knocking on the windows, banging on the windows, looking at demanding to see the count with an AR-15. Well, guess what? I'm not opening the door for you either.
Well, you know what? That is clearly about intimidation. And this is not about the Second Amendment. The First Amendment gives you the right to freedom of speech, but you can't go into a crowded movie theater and yell fire, right?
Thank you.
So there's limitations to your rights, right? And some of it is just simple common sense, but common sense isn't common anymore. But what happens is the idea, and we talked about this on election day when you and I were together, that the idea is there are going to be people who want to intimidate to prevent people from going for the polls or going out to the polls. And that was kind of bared out in the election count, because a lot of people who identify themselves as Democrats mailed in their ballot. Maybe they were worried about intimidation or acts or violence, so they mailed in their ballot. The people who identify themselves as Republicans, they went out and voted on election day in person. So when they started the tally, of course, Trump got out to a big lead because those were the in-person votes. But once they started doing counting the mail-in ballots, well, any lead that Trump had, evaporated pretty quickly, and Biden was declared the winner in many of those states.
Well, here's the funny thing: is as a patriotic American, because I'm starting to hear that nonsense about what did he tell me? You're siding with against your country. You should move to Korea. My answer was, listen, I'm from New York City. You understand, which is one of the oldest cities in this country back in the days when it was called New Amsterdam. I don't know anything else but America, but I have no choice but to love America. However, I don't have to like all of the things that America does. I don't like systemic racism. I don't like intimidation of any kind. and I'm not going to accept it. You're not going to force feed it to anybody. But the truth of the matter is, going back, I don't want to go too far off because it kind of irritated me. Okay, that you had people that are out there saying, if you don't like the results, now they said this in Obama, when Trump was not Obama, when Trump won. If you don't like the results of the election, then leave America, move out. Well, what's good for the goose is good for the gander.
Yeah, so maybe they should move out.
Exactly. And for the first time, and I will be, listen, not to be funny, but, many people have concealed weapons permits. And for the first time ever in my voting age life, I felt the need to keep a concealed weapon on me. That's not American. Actually, it's very American. But it's not what it's supposed to be. Where I have to protect myself. This is not the Wild Wild West.
Well, you know what? The problem is that, after Biden was declared the winner, after he won Pennsylvania, people went out into the streets to celebrate. And you saw people of all walks of life. People, black, brown, white, Asian, gay, straight. Everybody was together. There was no fear. There was no intimidation. But what you have is it's probably a small contingent of Trump supporters, right, that are extremists. And these are the people, I was watching 60 Minutes last Sunday, and the person who's in charge of the election down in Philadelphia, they were calling in death threats. They wanted them to stop the count. They were saying that there was cheating going on and that people weren't allowed in to observe, which was, of course, we know a lie now. But somebody said, well, you know what? This is what the Second Amendment is for. In other words, okay, the Second Amendment guarantees me the right to a firearm, right? So what you're doing is sending a veiled threat to these people. And all these people are doing is counting the ballots. Just counting them. And there's this hardcore contingent that is threatening people because they're counting the ballots. There's no evidence. No one has come forward with evidence to show any manipulation, anything untoward going on with this election. Yet, people are willing to resort to violence in order to, it's, in a sense, it's a coup. The people have spoken. A president has been elected, and yet you have a group of people who are saying, we don't care that we have a new president. We're going to keep the old one in office, and we'll resort to violence if we have to. The difference is stark. You have people that represent what America looks like, people of all skin tones, of all walks of life, celebrating together. And then you have another group of people who are angry, who are frustrated, and who are quick to resort to violence and intimidation.
Absolutely. One thing that I have to say is that everybody has to start taking this a little bit serious. Do not go to sleep on what's going on right now. I implore everybody, and this is not because I love the woman, I don't know the woman, I get nothing for endorsing this book, nothing. But it was very interesting on Audible, and I don't think it cost me more than a couple of bucks. Mary Trump, his niece, has a book called Enough is Never, Too Much is Never Enough.
Mm-hmm.
If you read the book, you will see who this man is, because she's not talking about him. She's talking about the family, the father, the brother, the way that he was raised. I kind of feel sorry for Donald Trump. I really do. Because this is somebody that was encapsulated into a circle where social behavior was never, social graces, social anything was never taught. It's like a spoiled child. By the time the boy was 6 years old, he had $6 million in the bank.
But you know something, Tony?
Okay.
You said take it a little seriously. We've got to take this a lot seriously.
Oh, I take it very
Because,
serious.
I know you're being facetious, but the thing is that, I was watching the news, like I said before I came on air, and they were talking about the possibility of Donald Trump leaving office angry and frustrated with information relative to national security. Now, what they said is that Donald Trump may be in debt in a range from $420 million to as high as $1 billion, and that Deutsche Bank, which has underwritten a lot of his debt, is trying to sell his debt. What happens if, say, the Russians buy his debt? What happens if the Chinese buy his debt? And now they say, Mr. Trump, now you owe us. What can you give us in exchange for us paying off your debt? So
it's so funny. I was just listening to, one of the talks that Obama had, President Obama had. And he was saying that, you know what, he has a secret Chinese bank account that magically got $400 million. Okay? $400 million. It was a ridiculous number right after he was elected president.
Right, and then he said that he closed that account and he focused not on his failures with his businesses, not the fact that he owed so much. He focused on the fact that allegedly Hunter Biden got $3 million from Burisma, the Ukrainian gas company. We never talked about how much money Donald Trump, how much he's made since he was elected president. You're supposed to divest from your businesses. Every other president divested from their businesses, but he wanted to hold, high-level meetings at, down in Mar-a-Lago. And he was housing FBI agents in his hotel, in D.C.
And it was 3 times as much. He was charging them $600 a night.
Well,
for your own security staff.
Well,
and billing the country. But on top of that, there was evidence that China, the Chinese corporation, the Kung Fu virus and all of the rhetoric. Listen, you know what? We all came up in New York, and we all say game recognized game. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
And when a Chinese company buys 11 of your properties and 1 casino, that is money laundering. You understand? That's money laundering. You're not even, he was supposed to be completely divested from his businesses, period. He's not showing his taxes, but I guess, I don't wish ill on anybody, but I'm going to tell you something. You do have to put a stop to tyranny where it is. You do have to put a stop to dangerous people where they stand. Leave them where you found them.
And you know what? I think that's the major issue. I think you hit on something when you talk about tyranny, right? And that is something that when you say you have to be, a little concerned, you have to be very, very concerned, because this is an attack on the democracy, American democracy. This is a slap in the face to democracy when you say, yes, when the outcome of the election shows that one person clearly won, and yet the other person refuses to concede, and instead of working toward a transition, has refused to even discuss transition, and is firing cabinet members, and is basically, it seems as if he's preparing for a long and protracted fight. We're supposed to have an inauguration on January 20th. I'm not sure that can happen with Donald Trump still in the White House. Even some of the Republicans who initially said, Mr. President, the people have spoken. Now some of those very same Republicans have backtracked, retracted what they said, and now are supporting the president, saying he has every right to file these legal claims and to basically hold democracy hostage. And that's something that we really need to be concerned about.
We also need to be concerned about the undertones of his rhetoric, because what affects us more directly as a community, as citizens of this country, is the type of rhetoric that would make two people drive from Virginia all the way to Pennsylvania with a car loaded with automatic weapons, some of which had serial numbers scratched off, or actually they were ghost weapons. They were Frankenstein weapons. They were built not to be detected by the government. Or I had to when you buy a firearm, everybody has to go through a check. These weapons didn't have to go through a check. They know what weapons I have. This weapon did not. So if anybody doesn't understand what a ghost weapon is, that's something that it doesn't exist. As far as any administrative body of the government knows, that weapon does not even exist. It's basically like, building a weapon.
Well, you know what? Now let me just, Tony, let me just clarify for people. Just let me just clarify for people. When you say ghost weapon, right? What that is a weapon. You are allowed to manufacture weapons. You can buy the parts and assemble the weapons yourself. Now, those weapons, even though they do not have a serial number because you're not buying them from a gun dealer, you're assembling these weapons yourself. These weapons are legal. To the best of my knowledge, they are legal, but they are not registered with either the state, local, or federal government. But now, go ahead, Tony.
So basically, if you use that weapon, you throw it away. Nobody knows who it belongs to. Okay? Now, what I'm also concerned about is the rhetoric that would motivate someone to jump in cars and decide that they're going to. This is unprecedented stuff here, and dangerous stuff.
But you know what? This is not new.
And murder the governor of a sitting governor.
Absolutely. So this is not new. This is not new. We've seen this. And in fairness to Trump, violence has always been woven into the fabric of America. America was founded violently, and America has maintained its grip on the world using violence, right? So we have to establish that. However, under the Trump administration, there are groups that for years had been, I guess, held at bay. These groups felt emboldened by the president, so much so that, we had the rally down in Charlottesville, Virginia, that led to the death of Heather Heyer, right? And the president, rather than condemning the violence, said there were fine people on both sides. And when he was asked about the Proud Boys, right?
Punch him in the face. Don't worry, I'll pay your legal bill.
Exactly. And the same situation with the Proud Boys. When he was asked about the Proud Boys, he said, "Stand by." He said, "Stand back and stand by."
And stand by.
Right. So stand by for what? Right. So
That's my point.
What's going right now? It is relatively quiet. You don't hear much from the president, who's normally very outspoken, right? But he's been quiet. He's been firing people on Twitter. He fired the defense secretary over Twitter. Didn't ask for his resignation. Didn't fire him, in person. He did it over Twitter. So he's been relatively quiet. I mean, there was some talk that he may hold a rally, but he's been relatively quiet, right? Which could be the well, it could be the calm before the storm, right? Because well, yeah. Well, you know what? But Trump has always been an outspoken person who wants to be heard, who always wants to be in the spotlight for him, I'm sure it's killing him not to be able to come out and talk, right? So this could be the calm before the storm, because in a lot of people's minds, and I'm talking about that contingent, that radical contingent, in their minds, this election was stolen from their president. This was not fair. There was manipulation. There was all these ballots that, and he talked about this in the months leading up to the election. He talked about how many fraudulent ballots had been mailed. So all this had been injected into the minds of these people for months, and now it has happened. The president has lost, and rather than admitting and conceding, he's saying no. And even the vice president today said that he has enjoyed serving as the president of the Senate, and that he is going to continue to serve as the president of the Senate. So the rhetoric is that these guys are not planning on leaving the White House.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But what does that spell? Let's be very real. Let's point it out. Let's get down to the meat and potatoes. This is the saber rattling that started the Civil War in this country. Let's call it what it is. Okay? Anytime that friends are turning against friends, you had in the Civil War brothers turning against brothers. Because one believed in one thing, the other one believed in another thing. You have 70 million people that voted for this individual. 70 million that now he's saber rattling and telling them. You have his son that got on the media and said that he believes that his father needs to fight this to the death. And what else was it? This should be all-out war.
Well, you know something?
These are dog whistle things, and I gotta be concerned.
And we all need we all need to be right. We all need to be concerned, because there is that contingent, right, that is just waiting. And these folks, some of these groups have been training. Some of these are paramilitary groups that have been training and preparing for all-out war, right? So it's interesting to me, the level of hypocrisy, how at one turn it's lawlessness. When people were demonstrating, and people were demonstrating peacefully, that was considered lawlessness. When there is an election and the president has been defeated and he refuses to accept the outcome of the election, isn't that a form of lawlessness? Does not the law say that every 4 years we have an election for president, and that on January 20th we have an inauguration? And prior to that, we have a transition of power. We have the transition teams meeting to discuss and plan an agenda for the incoming president. That has not happened. So lawlessness, it's lawlessness when people are peacefully protesting. But when the president decides, I'm not going to accept the will of the people, they don't consider it lawless.
Well, I consider it basically, when you fit the military. And I'll be honest, I lived in Los Angeles during the riots. And it is very scary to watch tanks roll down the street in the United States, in streets that you're familiar with. And you're watching the full, this wasn't a parade. They were coming to get order. Okay? This wasn't the National Guard. This was the troops that had just come back from Desert Storm. Flew right into Los Angeles. You understand? Mm-hmm. When this man, because he wants to take a picture, shows you the level of insanity, the level of immaturity, the level of just nonsense that he is willing to do. When you tear gas, you send the National Guard out, and the commander of the National Guard had to come out the next morning and apologize and say he should have never. Those troops should have never gone out and gassed, because basically that was an act of war by the American government, by the U.S. government, upon U.S. citizens.
Well,
okay?
Tony.
I think that he just fired
Right. Well, Tony, right? Tony, right now, we're getting close to 7 o'clock,
Okay,
7 o'clock hour.
but,
So we're really running out of time. But you know what? This is a conversation that needs to continue. I wanted to hit on many points. I wanted to talk about not just a federal election, but the senatorial election down in Georgia. There's two seats that are going to be hotly contested that may shift the balance uh, of power and give the Democrats control of both houses of the Senate. And well, I wanted to talk a little bit about the election here. Claudette Williams. We know that she came up a little bit short, and we need to talk about why. And did racism or did race play a factor? The fact that she's a woman, is it the gender bias that also played a role? And these are things that we need to discuss, and we need to be talking to the Biden camp right now, because it was black people that put Biden over the top during the nominating process. When he went to Biden was losing in the primary, so he went to South Carolina, and Jim Clyburn rallied the black troops to come out in support of Biden. And the fact that he won Philadelphia, a lot of black folks went to the polls or mailed in their ballots to support Biden. So now it is time that people realize if you're going to be loyal to the president, you need to be loyal to the people, or show just as much loyalty to the people as you show to the president. And if they did that, we wouldn't have half the problems we have right now. But we need to start this conversation, right? And we need to keep this conversation going. I know there are a number of groups. There's a new political party that's forming called the Black Party, and their focus is to address the issues affecting Black America. And there are a number of online petitions where people are preparing an agenda, if you will, to present to Biden on day one to let them know exactly what the needs are of the black community. So we have to keep this conversation going. We have to stay active and we have to stay engaged. We cannot fall asleep and wake up 4 years from now ready to go cast our votes again. We're in for, Biden called it a dark winter. We're in for a dangerous time and the dark winter. Between the COVID and the violence that may be fomenting, we need to be extremely careful. But Tony, I thank you for calling in. I thank you.
We will definitely continue this.
Yes, we will.
You know that I tend to sometimes get a little passionate about things, but the protection of those that, of loved ones, oh yeah, I'm highly motivated and truly dedicated. I'm highly motivated and truly dedicated to this one.
Well, I know you are, because we were together last Tuesday, and we went out there and we were going to do what was necessary to do to protect people. But Tony, I thank you for calling in, and
thank you.
We're going to get out of here, but this is an ongoing conversation, and we're going to keep this conversation going. This is a movement that is in its infancy, and we've got to keep this movement growing. It is time now that we begin to take a more active role in our own communities and in the governance of this country. But with that, I'm going to say thank you again, Tony, for calling in. And I'm going to say good night. I see the next show walking in. So thank you for listening and have a good night.
Good night. God bless. Peace.
Thank you. Peace.